He married her to make someone else suffer. A cold, calculated move, marrying the quiet maid no one noticed. No love. No feelings. Just revenge. But somewhere between late-night silences, stolen glances, and a truth he never saw coming, the billionaire who couldn't love, fell for the one woman he was never supposed to. And when he finally realized it, it might already be too late. In a world where power decides everything, love is often the first thing sacrificed. Alexander Kane was a man who built empires out of silence and control. A billionaire with a reputation as cold as the steel towers he owned. To him, emotions were liabilities, and love? A weakness he buried long ago. But betrayal has a way of rewriting even the strongest rules. When the woman he once trusted shattered him in the worst way possible, Alexander didn't just walk away, he planned something far more ruthless. Revenge. And that revenge came in the form of an unexpected choice, marrying Amara. A quiet, hard-working maid in his own mansion. Invisible to most. Overlooked by everyone. Including him. What started as a calculated move to humiliate someone else, slowly became something neither of them were prepared for. Because Amara wasn't who he thought she was. And Alexander Kane wasn't as untouchable as he believed. This is a story about power, pain, and a love that neither of them saw coming. Alexander Kane didn't believe in coincidences. Everything in his life, from billion-dollar deals to the way his morning coffee was served, was calculated, deliberate, controlled. So when betrayal hit him, it wasn't chaos he felt. It was clarity. 3 weeks earlier, he had stood in a penthouse suite overlooking the city, staring at the woman he once planned to marry, Victoria Hale. Beautiful. Elegant. Ambitious. And disloyal. She meant nothing, Victoria had said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. But Alexander didn't react. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't ask questions. Because the evidence had already answered everything. His business rival. His enemy. And the woman who was supposed to stand beside him, had chosen the other side. That night, something inside him shifted. Not heartbreak. Not anger. Something colder. I won't destroy you, Alexander had told her calmly. Victoria's shoulders relaxed. Too soon. I'll do something worse. And that's when the idea began to take shape. Not a scandal. Not a confrontation. But a marriage. Not to Victoria. To someone else. Someone unexpected. Someone invisible. Amara had worked in the Kane estate for nearly 2 years. She woke before sunrise, moved quietly through hallways that didn't belong to her, and kept her head down like she'd learned to do her entire life. To the staff, she was kind. To the managers, she was efficient. To Alexander Kane? She was no one. At least, that's what she thought. Until the morning everything changed. Mr. Kane wants to see you. Amara froze, her hands tightening around the tray she carried. That had never happened before. Not once. She nodded, trying to steady herself as she followed the house manager through the towering halls. Her heart pounded, not from fear of losing her job, but from the unknown. When she stepped into his office, the air itself felt different. Still. Heavy. Controlled. Alexander sat behind a massive desk, his dark eyes lifting just slightly as she entered. For a moment, he said nothing. Just studied her. And for the first time since she'd worked there, Amara felt seen. Your name, he said finally. Amara. His gaze lingered. Not with warmth. But with assessment. Like she was a decision waiting to be made. Do you need something, sir? She asked softly. Alexander leaned back slightly. And then, without hesitation, I want you to marry me. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Amara blinked, convinced she had misunderstood. Sir. This will be a contractual marriage, he continued, as if discussing a business deal. You'll be compensated. Generously. Her heart raced. This is a joke, right? It's not. His tone didn't change. Didn't soften. Why me? She whispered. And for the first time, there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Because you're exactly what I need. Amara didn't know it yet. But in that moment, her life had just collided with a storm she wasn't prepared for. And Alexander Kane? He had just made the one decision that would change everything. Amara didn't sleep that night. How could she? The words replayed in her mind over and over again. Marry me. It didn't make sense. Nothing about Alexander Kane suggested impulsiveness. He was precise, intentional, distant. Men like him didn't make strange proposals to maids. So why her? Sitting on the edge of her small bed in the staff quarters, Amara tried to piece it together. Was it a test? A mistake? Or something worse? By morning, she had convinced herself of one thing: she needed answers. Alexander, on the other hand, had already moved forward. Contracts drafted. Lawyers informed. Press strategies prepared. To him, this wasn't emotional. It was tactical. When Amara was brought back into his office, the atmosphere felt even more suffocating than before. A folder sat neatly on the desk in front of him. Sit. She hesitated, then obeyed. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were pages, terms, conditions, timelines. This outlines everything, he said. The marriage will last 1 year. 1 year, she repeated, her voice barely steady. You'll live here. Appear with me at public events. Fulfill the role of my wife. And after that, a settlement. Enough to ensure you never have to work again. Amara's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages. It felt unreal. Like she had stepped into someone else's life. This isn't normal, she said quietly. I'm not asking for normal. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. I'm asking for your agreement. And if I say no? For a brief second, something dangerous flickered in his expression. Then you return to your life exactly as it is now. The words were simple. But the meaning wasn't. Because her life as it is wasn't easy. It was survival. Bills. Sacrifices. Dreams she had long since buried. Alexander knew that. And she knew he knew. This marriage, she hesitated. It's not real, is it? No, the answer came instantly. Cold. Clear. Final. And yet, something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. Because it felt like he was trying to convince himself too. Hours passed before she gave him an answer. Hours of walking. Thinking. Fighting with herself. Until finally, she returned. Alexander didn't look surprised when she stepped back into his office. Have you decided? Amara took a slow breath. Yes. A pause. I'll do it. And just like that, the deal was sealed. But neither of them realized. This wasn't just a contract. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. Because revenge might have started this marriage. But it wouldn't be what defined it in the end. Perfect. Let's continue the story and deepen the tension, emotion, and slow-burn romance. The wedding was everything the media dreamed of, and nothing either of them felt. Golden lights draped across the grand estate. Cameras flashing. Headlines already written before the vows were even spoken. Billionaire Alexander Kane marries mystery woman. No one called her by name. To them, Amara was a question mark in a designer dress. Standing at the altar, her hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet. The fabric of her gown felt too heavy, too expensive, like it didn't belong on her skin. Like none of this belonged to her. Across from her, Alexander stood perfectly still. Composed. Untouchable. His expression didn't change when the officiant spoke. Didn't soften when Amara's voice shook slightly during her vows. And when it was his turn, his words were flawless. Polished. Empty. I do. 2 words. No hesitation. No emotion. Just a signature on a living contract. From the crowd, Victoria watched. Her jaw tightened, fingers curling around her champagne glass as whispers spread around her. She's a maid. Alexander Kane married a maid. The humiliation burned hotter than anger. Because this wasn't just a marriage. It was a message. And Victoria understood it perfectly. The kiss sealed everything. Brief. Controlled. Almost distant. But to the cameras, it was perfect. To Amara? It felt like stepping into a role she didn't know how to play. That night, the mansion felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. No longer a maid. Now, Mrs. Kane. The title sat uncomfortably in her chest. She stood in the massive bedroom she was now expected to share, staring at the city lights beyond the glass walls. You can take the room, Alexander's voice came from behind her. She turned. He had already removed his jacket, his presence filling the space without effort. I'll use the study when necessary. Amara frowned slightly. You don't have to. This arrangement works better with distance. Of course it did. Because distance meant control. And control was everything to him. Days turned into a blur of adjustments. New clothes. Etiquette lessons. Media training. How to walk. How to speak. How to exist in a world that had never been hers. And through it all, Alexander watched. Not closely. Not kindly. But carefully. Like he was waiting for her to fail. But she didn't. Even when her hands shook beneath the table. Even when people whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Amara held herself together. And slowly, something unexpected began to shift. Because she wasn't breaking. She was adapting. And Alexander Kane had not anticipated that. It started with something small. It always does. A glance. A pause. A moment that lingers just a second too long. Alexander noticed it first during a charity gala. Amara stood beside him, dressed in elegance that still felt foreign to her, but she carried it with quiet dignity. Not arrogance. Not insecurity. Something else. Strength. You're staring, she murmured under her breath without looking at him. Alexander blinked slightly, caught off guard. I'm observing. A faint smile touched her lips. Is that what you call it? He didn't respond. But for the first time, he wasn't entirely in control of the moment. Later that night, something shifted again. A wealthy guest made a comment. Subtle. Cruel. So tell me, the woman said, sipping her drink. How does it feel to go from cleaning floors to owning them? Silence fell. Eyes turned. Waiting. Watching. Amara could feel it. The judgment, the expectation, the quiet anticipation of her discomfort. Alexander tensed slightly beside her. He expected hesitation. Embarrassment. But Amara surprised him. She smiled. Calm. Steady. Honestly, she said gently. Flaws are easier. They don't pretend to be something they are not. The air shifted instantly. A few suppressed laughs. The woman's expression faltered. And Alexander. He almost smiled. That night, as they returned home, the silence between them felt different. Not cold. Not empty. Something unspoken lingered. You handled that well, he said finally. Amara glanced at him. Surprised. Yes. She nodded slowly. People usually are. There was no bitterness in her tone. Just truth. And for reasons he didn't fully understand. That unsettled him. Days turned into weeks. And Alexander began noticing things he hadn't before. The way she spoke to the staff, with respect, not authority. The way she carried herself, not trying to belong, but refusing to shrink. The way she looked at him sometimes. Not with fear. Not with admiration. But with quiet curiosity. Like she was trying to understand him. And that? That was dangerous. Because Alexander Kane had spent years ensuring no one truly did. It happened late one night. Unexpected. Unplanned. And impossible to ignore. Alexander couldn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what he heard. Soft music. Faint. Coming from downstairs. Curiosity wasn't something he entertained often. But something about the sound drew him in. When he reached the living room, he stopped. Amara stood barefoot on the marble floor, softly swaying to music playing from her phone. No audience. No performance. Just her. Free. Unfiltered. Real. For a moment, he didn't move. Didn't speak. Because what he was seeing didn't match the version of her he had created in his mind. This wasn't the quiet maid. This wasn't the composed wife. This was someone else entirely. Someone, alive. You're staring again. Her voice broke the moment, but she didn't stop moving. Alexander stepped forward slightly. You do this often. Only when no one's watching. A pause. Then, softly. Or when I think no one is. Their eyes met. And something shifted. Something neither of them could explain. Why did you say yes? The question came out quieter than he expected. Amara stopped moving. The music continued. Why did you ask? She countered. He didn't answer. Because the truth wasn't something he wanted to say out loud. Life doesn't always give you good choices, she said finally. Sometimes it just gives you options. Alexander studied her. And I was the best option. She held his gaze. You were the most honest one. That hit harder than it should have. Because he had been honest. Cold. Detached. Clear. But honest. And somehow, that mattered to her. For the first time in a long time, Alexander felt something unfamiliar. Not control. Not strategy. Something quieter. More dangerous. Interest. And as the music faded into silence, he realized something else. This marriage was no longer just about revenge. Let's bring this story to its emotional peak and deliver a powerful, satisfying ending. Alexander Kane didn't get jealous. He didn't have to. In his world, people either stayed in line, or they disappeared from relevance. But this was new. And he didn't like it. It started at a business dinner. Nothing unusual. High-profile guests. Strategic conversations. Polished smiles. Amara sat beside him, poised as always, quietly observing the room. Until someone new joined the table. Daniel Reyes, the man introduced himself, offering a warm, genuine smile. Unlike the others, Daniel didn't look at Amara with curiosity or judgment. He looked at her like she was simply a person. And you are? He asked kindly. Amara, she replied. No title. No hesitation. Just her name. Alexander noticed the shift immediately. The ease in her posture. The way her smile came more naturally. The way she spoke, freely. It was subtle. But it was there. And it irritated him more than it should have. You've never done this before, have you? Daniel asked her lightly. Amara laughed softly. Is it that obvious? Only because you're not pretending. Alexander's jaw tightened. The conversation flowed. Too easily. Too comfortably. And for reasons he refused to acknowledge. Alexander interrupted. Sharp. Controlled. Amara, we're leaving. Both of them looked at him. Surprised. In the car, silence stretched between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. You were rude, Amara said finally. Alexander's gaze stayed forward. We had other obligations. No, she replied calmly. You didn't like that I was talking to him. That hit too close. I don't concern myself with things that don't matter. Amara turned slightly toward him. Then why did it bother you? He didn't answer. Because he didn't have one that made sense. But later that night, as he stood alone in his office, staring out at the city, the truth became impossible to ignore. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't the conversation. It was her. The idea of her, choosing someone else. Trusting someone else. Looking at someone else the way she had begun to look at him. And for the first time, Alexander Kane realized something dangerous. This was no longer just a contract. Because somewhere along the way, he had started to care. Truth has a way of revealing itself at the worst possible time. And when it does, it doesn't ask permission. Amara found out by accident. Or maybe, it was inevitable. She had gone into Alexander's office looking for him. The door was slightly open. Voices inside. One of them, familiar. Victoria. Amara froze. I underestimated you, Victoria's voice said sharply. But marrying her? That was low, even for you. Alexander didn't respond immediately. And that silence said everything. She was never part of your world, Victoria continued. You used her. Used. The word echoed in Amara's chest. Finally, Alexander spoke. Cold. Measured. It was necessary. Amara's breath caught. Necessary? For revenge. Victoria snapped. You humiliated me by marrying your maid. Congratulations. Silence. Then. It worked. That was it. No denial. No explanation. Just confirmation. Amara stepped back quietly, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. But they didn't. Because in that moment, she didn't exist. Not as a person. Not as a wife. Just as a tool. By the time Alexander came looking for her, it was already too late. Amara. Don't. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She stood in the center of the room, eyes steady, but something inside them had changed. You married me for revenge. It wasn't a question. Alexander didn't lie. I told you it wasn't real. That's not the same thing, she replied. And she was right. You used me, she said quietly. Something in his chest tightened. That wasn't. It was. Her voice broke slightly, but she held herself together. I knew this wasn't a love story, Alexander. But I didn't think I was just a weapon. He stepped closer. For the first time. Not controlled. Not calculated. Things changed. Amara shook her head. Not for me. That was the moment everything fell apart. Amara didn't leave in anger. She left in silence. And somehow, that hurt more. The papers were simple. Clean. Efficient. Just like everything else in Alexander's world. I've adjusted the settlement, he said, placing the documents in front of her. She didn't look at them. I don't want your money. That's not negotiable. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. Everything is negotiable to you. The words lingered between them. Heavy. True. Was any of it real? She asked. That question. It hit harder than anything else. Alexander opened his mouth. But no answer came out. Because the truth was complicated. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to simplify it. Amara nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She signed the papers. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to walk away with what little of herself she still had. Days later, she was gone. No headlines. No announcements. Just absence. And the mansion felt emptier than it ever had. Alexander tried to return to normal. Work. Meetings. Control. But nothing felt the same. Because everywhere he looked, there were pieces of her. The quiet strength. The unexpected laughter. The way she saw him. Not as a billionaire. But as a man. And now? She was gone. For the first time in years. Alexander Kane had everything. And it meant absolutely nothing. It took him too long to understand it. But when he did, it was undeniable. He didn't miss the marriage. He didn't miss the arrangement. He missed her. Not the role she played. Not the image she created. But Amara. And that realization changed everything. Finding her wasn't easy. She hadn't returned to the world she came from. She had built something new. Something on her own terms. When Alexander finally stood in front of her again, there were no cameras. No contracts. No expectations. Just truth. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. I know. A pause. Then. I didn't come to fix anything. He stepped closer. Carefully. Like one wrong move would make her disappear again. I came to tell you the truth. Amara didn't respond. But she didn't walk away either. I was wrong, he said. Simple. Unfiltered. I thought control was everything. That emotions made people weak. His voice lowered. But you proved me wrong. Her eyes searched his. Not for perfection. For honesty. I didn't plan to care about you, he continued. But I did. A breath. I still do. Silence. Then. That doesn't undo what you did. I know. Another step. Closer. But if there's even a chance, I want to earn it. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Measuring. Remembering. Feeling. You can't buy this, she said softly. I'm not trying to. And for the first time, there was no power between them. No imbalance. No control. Just two people. Standing at the edge of something real. Amara exhaled slowly. This doesn't start where it left off. It doesn't have to. A small pause. Then we start over. And this time, it wasn't a contract. It was a choice. Love wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't written into the contract. And it definitely wasn't something Alexander Kane believed in. But sometimes, the most unexpected people change everything. If you enjoyed this story of power, betrayal, and unexpected love, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next story might be even more unforgettable. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Alexander?